Sure. I'll just introduce myself so that I'll put my email in the chat. I just want to reiterate, and I know Corinne will mention if there are any alumni that you see on LinkedIn or any place that you want to reach out to, 99.99% of them will answer a request from a student. But if you want an introduction from someone from the college, I'm the director of gift planning. So I help raise gifts for scholarships and internship awards through major gifts and also through estate planning. So I also have quite a few connections with the alumni. So if there's anybody that you see in LinkedIn that you'd either like to shadow or ask questions of, just feel free to send me an email and I'll connect you. And take it away, Corinne.
Great. Hi, guys. Really excited to be a part of this. I think this is such a great program, and hopefully you guys will find my story useful. If it's okay with you, I'll talk to you a little bit about what I've been up to since I left Oneonta, some key learnings that I learned along the way that I wish somebody would have told me back then, and then I'll open up to Q&A, and hopefully you guys will all chime in because I think would love to hear from you and any questions you may have. So I graduated in December 2006. It's really hard to believe. I was a major in communication studies with a minor in marketing and business communications. I loved my time at Oneonta. I played soccer while I was there under Tracy Ranieri. So I was part of the 2003 national championship team.
Oh my gosh. Congratulations. And just a side note, she just announced her retirement.
Did she? That's breaking news.
It is
my
breaking
goodness.
news. Yeah, it's bittersweet. I think she has some caregiving responsibilities at home with her mom, but it's just, I'm thrilled for her. She looks like the weight of the world is off her shoulders. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but
no, that's good. Thank you. Yeah, I'll have to ping her. Oh, that's, yeah, she's wonderful. And truly playing soccer for me, it was is a significant part of my life. There's, hand to God, there's not a day that goes by that that doesn't come up in conversation, that it, doesn't have a profound impact on my personal decisions, my professional decisions. It actually just came up this morning with a conversation I had with my CMO. So it really is a wonderful thing. So anyone, whatever your passion is, whether it's sports or, Greek life, whatever it is, I say own that because it's super important. As I mentioned, I live in Westchester with my husband and 2 sons, and I currently work at IBM. So how did I get to IBM? I started my career at Life magazine, and just by a show of hands, how many of you know what Life magazine is? Oh, more of you than I expected. So I was there for about 2 months when the company decided to fold the magazine and stop funding it. So at the ripe old age of 21, I was laid off, and they handed me a severance package, which, I mean, I might as well have been reading German. I didn't know what was in it. I didn't understand it. I was way too young to understand what a severance package was. But thankfully I transferred internally to People magazine, and that's really where I got my start. So I worked under 3 different sales leaders there. I was doing customer relations. I was learning about sales negotiations and the world of print. And I think most importantly, it was how to be in a corporate setting. I think that's something that you cannot learn in school. You have to do it to know it. So whatever that first job ends up being, whatever that first internship ends up being, that's where you'll learn that. And it's such an important trait, and you just can't do it until you get there. And then I will say that if you've ever seen Devil Wears Prada, there is some truth to that movie. So that's just a little sneak peek into what I did there. But in general, it was a great time. I was there for about 2 years. And then I moved on to Saveur magazine, which is a food, wine, and travel magazine. I was the first hire under a brand new marketing team there. So I was doing partnerships, events, packages, marketing materials, RFPs. It was really interesting time there because it was 2008. And so if you can think back that far, digital was still very new. And so we didn't have a clear website. Social didn't exist then. We didn't have a Twitter account as a brand. No one knew how to sell digital. It was, no one barely even knew what the ad sizes were, let alone how to price them out. So all of that was new for us. It was new for the sales team. And that was really the first lesson of my career, in that you really have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Jeannie Rometty, our old IBM CEO, used to say, comfort and growth cannot coexist. And no truer words have ever been said. You cannot grow if you're stuck in your comfort zone. I always say comfort equals complacency. You need to be able to push yourself, and you can't do that when you're in your own little space. So the more that you can grow as an employee, the more that you will be marketable to them and to the outside world, the more valuable you'll be, and the more that you can kind of write your own script. So as much as trying something new or being in a situation that makes you uncomfortable, as not fun as it is, I challenge you to embrace it as much as you can. Just because you'll walk out of there and really be better for it. So I was at Sever for a total of probably close to 3 years. I changed roles a bunch of different times. And then I moved on to thestreet.com, which is a digital financial publisher. If you are familiar with MSNBC's Jim Cramer, it's his website. Very different, as you can imagine, from Sever, which is food, wine, and travel. So you'll see in my career path, I've sort of been in very similar roles, but just different industries. So it's been interesting to see the different take from one industry to another. And that was really great because it was a complete rebranding at the time. There was a new CEO in place, new strategy, but funny enough, they had no marketing collateral. So the sales team was going out the door with just themselves and nothing to sell. So, it was really on me to build all of that for them, to build the sales kits, to build the packages. I very quickly realized that I missed being a part of a team. I was a one-woman show there, which was fun for a little bit until it wasn't so fun. And then I also really missed female leadership there because it was very much run by very smart, talented men, but it was all men. And that, I'll say, would really led me to know that I couldn't stay there that long. It wasn't something that I wanted to stay long-term. And that's kind of lesson 2, if you will, of my career path. And that's that you really have to know when to leave the party. And you have to know when to leave the holiday party, which is a whole nother discussion for another day. But I think it's really important to know when to leave the office and the corporation that you're working for. And it's not always obvious, right? There's the obvious ones where if you're working for a toxic boss or bad colleagues, or you just don't align with the strategy. Those are very obvious situations. And there's the not so obvious ones. And you have to list out pros and cons and figure out, is it time to leave? Is it not? And sometimes you make the right decision and sometimes you don't. And sometimes you look back and the company went public and you just lost out on $1 million. And you just don't know until you take that leap of faith.
Corinne,
but I'll say, yeah.
Can I interrupt you just 1 second? So
yeah.
in this pretty concentrated length of time, it sounds like you made some really good strategic moves. Were they made because you knew people at different areas, or were people seeing you and reaching out to you? Or was it that you were building relationships and like when one team member left, sometimes they go back and take other, good workers? Like, can you explain a little bit, like this is really great information, but like explain a little bit like how you, when you knew the role wasn't feeling right, like how did you put your feelers out for like other opportunities?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So interestingly enough, Sever, they had reached out to a colleague of mine and she wasn't ready to leave. So when we were at People, she was like, nope, I'm good. I'm happy where I am. And she had said to me, is this something you'd be interested in? So that's how I found that one. Overall, in general, I will say I've always left knowing people at different places. And that's really, really the key to all of this is your network. And I'll get into a little bit of where I think networking works and where I think network doesn't work, because I do think that there's a little bit of a fine line there. With the Street, I ended up working with a handful of people that I worked with 2 jobs prior to that. So it's always been having people in place where your worlds collide over and over again. But I will also say that, if you look at my resume, you'll see that I've jumped around a lot, and I really haven't jumped around a lot. It's just that mentality of, okay, you need to be somewhere for 10 years, 20 years. That is completely dated. Don't let anyone tell you need to stay somewhere. Would I jump around every 6 months? No, I wouldn't do that. But I would strategically make the choice based on the position you are in your life. And, my parents would, back then, my parents would say to me like, Corinne, you're jumping around a lot. Is there something like missing? Are you not really getting along with your colleagues or your bosses? And, I had to very gently explain to my father that the days of him where he stayed where he was for 20 years doesn't exist anymore. And now they completely get it. But in the beginning, that was a completely new foreign idea to them, that you would jump. But I also think it's critical. I think you're doing yourself a disservice when you stay somewhere too long. And granted, there are nuances and situations where you should stay, but in general, I think it's really important to see different managers. It's important to see different strategies for a company. And you can't get that when you stay at the same place for 10 years straight, 20 years straight. So I stayed at the street for exactly a year. And then I moved on to Hearst, and I did that digital there. I spent, so far, the bulk of my career has been at Hearst. I spent 5 years there, and I did digital for the digital side of Elle Magazine, Cosmopolitan, Marie Claire, and 17. And that was a really, really phenomenal experience. Again, if you can recall 2012, it was a really dynamic time to be part of digital. We were finally getting our groove, right? People understood digital. They knew it was important. The pendulum was finally swinging in the direction of digital being this important tactic, and brands jumping on board and wanting to be a part of it. Because before that, it was added value, right? Like they were like, we'll sell something and we'll throw in some digital. Or, digital's cool, but like it's for young kids. I don't really understand it. And so you had these iconic brands that didn't understand digital, and they needed somebody to come in there and explain how valuable this was to an audience. And so that's what we were really able to do there. And when I started, if you looked at the revenue from print, it was massive, right? And digital was sort of like a blip on the radar. And then by the time I had left 5 years later, digital was really creeping back up and really getting close to that print spend. And, we were doing million video views in a day. That had never happened before. I mean, we were reaching this massive audience that had never happened before. We partnered with Snapchat to establish the Cosmopolitan channel. It's funny, we had this meeting with Snapchat, and they first came in and they handed us a 20-page PowerPoint, and they said, "This is what we're trying to sell. We want to partner with you for it." And we're like, this is 20 pages of, I don't even know what I'm looking at. And, we kind of just had to run with it. And so then they came in for the second meeting and they said, "We have one phone. This is the prototype of the app." And they showed us the app, and we were like, all right, I could wrap my head around this. This is actually kind of cool. And so, together we came up with the Cosmopolitan Snapchat channel. And then all of a sudden we were selling these 15-second video clips. But again, that, you try changing an industry of people who just had never seen that before. We went to advertisers. They were like, "What do you mean 15 seconds? Like, I can't even say my name in 15 seconds. And then, fast forward, it became one of the most valuable and marketable channels on the platform. Same thing with Musical.ly. We had a partnership with Musical.ly that had never been done before. If you guys are familiar, how many of you know what TikTok is? Okay. I don't know if you know this, but Musical.ly was what TikTok was before it was TikTok. And so we had partnered with them for the first time ever. And that was brand new. But again, that was a very new audience and a new tactic that people had a hard time wrapping their heads around when we first started. So that was a lot of it. A lot of it was education. A lot of it was, how do we sell this thing, right? How do you sell 15-second ad units? It had never been done before. And so we had to do that. And then also really get to know our audience, because audiences are what matter, right? It doesn't matter what you're selling. It matters who you're selling to, and can you effectively reach that audience? And that was the other thing about being at Hearst during those 5 years, is all of a sudden programmatic selling became a thing, right? All of a sudden I could go to CoverGirl and say, "You want to reach millennials who care about lipstick? I have your audience right here. We can reach people in the Northeast who love lipstick tutorials, who are between the ages of 18 to 24, who bank with Chase Bank." And all of a sudden it was mind blowing that you could reach this very targeted niche group. And that's where it became gold.
How did you figure out how to price, like going from like print, where I'm sure, you priced it on like what the, circulation was, like, how did you price something that you had no idea what? I guess after a while you could figure out what the followers would be, but like, how did that all evolve?
Yeah. So they, when they went out with the prototype, they had to give us an estimated audience reach. And in some of those partnerships, they were way off. And some of those partnerships, they were completely spot on. And a lot of it was a little bit, in the beginning, it was a little bit of trial and error. And sometimes we went out the door and we were looking back, we were completely overpriced. And then looking back there, sometimes we were completely underpriced and we over delivered this crazy amount. And all of a sudden the audience, the advertiser was like, this is great. I'll take 20 more of these. But you just, you kind of have to play with it. And actually, if I had looked back, I should have kept some of my media plans from those times, because it would be fascinating to see right now what we price some of that at. But you just didn't have a choice but to try it. It was very much trial and error. And sometimes it was a win for us, and sometimes it was a much bigger win for the advertiser. It was a win for everyone at some capacity, but yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, great.
Yeah. And then if you could believe it, social had really just started to come in and of itself. So brands before that hadn't really been on Facebook. They hadn't really been on Instagram. And so all of a sudden you needed to figure out what was your brand voice, right? Before that, brands were like, I don't know, I'll post a little bit on Facebook. I'll post a little bit on Instagram. And all of a sudden you needed to get better at it. You needed to be consistent across the board. You needed consistent messaging. You had to stay relevant and reliant on these social media platforms. And so that was really interesting too. And that was before, nowadays there's a lot more regulations on brands and guidelines and things like that. That was a decade ago. And it was very much the wild, wild west. The laws and the guidelines that you see in place now didn't exist then. And so that was kind of cool just to figure it out. And some things worked. And then sometimes we got a ton of backlash on social media, and we just had to kind of figure out our way and figure out our voice. And it was an interesting time. And then there was advertising on those platforms as well, which again was brand new, because the products were always changing on Facebook at the time. The products today are pretty standard. At the time, they were rolling out new products just as much as we were rolling out new products. So we'd partner with them and we'd try it, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But that was it was really fun time to be a part of digital. And it was important time for digital, because it was really the coming out, I would say, of that platform. So yeah, I was there for 5 years. By the time I left, I was director of digital brand development, and I loved it. I really did. After 5 years, I think it was time to move on. Again, there was something that I just in my gut felt like it was time to make a transition. And I really wanted to work for a tech company. So I found IBM, and actually IBM is really interesting. It's the one place I didn't know anyone. The only place in my career that I've gone where I didn't know anyone when I first entered. And it's the biggest company I've worked for. So 350,000 employees, and I knew no one.
It's the scariest place in the world to go and not know a soul.
Yes. In hindsight, that was interesting. And I started as a digital strategist. Go ahead. Did you have a question?
Well, I just wondered why tech, because you hadn't done that yet.
Yeah. I had honestly loved so much of that, of knowing your audience and being really strategic. And not that you're not strategic in publishing, but I had seen publishing and I had done it for so long. It was time for me to try a different medium or try a different discipline. Really, the medium is the same. And I think in general, I don't want to say I was bored with publishing, but after over a decade of it, it was just time to try something new. And I really liked I knew that that's where the world was going, was technology, and it continues to go that way. And I think there were certain things that I loved about publishing that were starting to go by the wayside. And it was time to stick with the things that I did love about the jobs that I was doing at the time. And that was the whole SEO and user journey and user experience and knowing your audience. That was the stuff that I really loved. And that was continuing to just double down on that. And that's what I did at IBM when I first started. I did all paid media. So I took kind of those key learnings from everywhere that I had been before and applied that to IBM. And it's funny because when I first got there and people would say, well, where did you come from? And I tell them and they'd be like, that seems like a weird departure. But the truth is that it's really not. You think about it, right? You're in the B2B space, but there's really no such thing as B2C anymore or B2B, right? It's B2I, it's business to individual. It's not, yes, I sell to John Smith, who's a CEO at XYZ bank. But John Smith is a human being and he cares about human things. And so once you position it like that, it changes the game a little bit, right? You don't think of him as this, yes, he's super senior, and yes, he makes a lot of money, and yes, he makes very big decisions, and he's got a lot of people under him to make happy, but he's also a human being that at the end of the day just wants to do really good things for his job and really good things for his company. And that's where we come in, right? We help them transform and be the best business that they can be. So I think when you take that perspective, it changes the whole scariness, if you will, of a B2B space. So yeah, I was digital strategist there for a couple of years. And then about a little over a year and a half ago, I moved over to campaign management. That's been really, really fun. So campaign management is really managing and orchestrating the end-to-end campaign. So it's very much being like a conductor of an orchestra, because you're touching so many different things, which I love. It's working with the content team. It's working with sales enablement, our ABM team, our products team, right? When we go for a big launch, there are so many people that need to touch that. And so being able to orchestrate all of that is, to me, one of the most exciting jobs I've ever had. And it really takes the key components of everything I've done and puts them all into fruition every single day. But I will say that IBM, the third key learning I'll take from the last couple of years is agility is key. And your ability to be successful hinges on your ability to be agile. And if 2020 has taught us nothing else, it is that. Like, I went to the office on March 10th of 2020. I have not been back to the office since. I will not go back to the office until 2022. And at that point, it'll be almost 2 years. So you have to learn to be agile. And I was telling Jill this earlier, thankfully IBM, and smartly so, right? We knew how to work from home. This wasn't new to us, but there's a lot of companies who didn't know how to work from home. And a lot of companies struggled for a very long time on how to shift their business structure and shift how they work, the way that they work. So I think for you all, you need to think about it in the capacity of the work and the structure that you do, is how can you be agile? And that goes back to the getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right? Because if you can shift on a dime, you become that much more valuable, right? Management changes, campaigns change, coworkers come and go, budgets come and go, product rollout changes, all of that changes. But if you can change with it and do it well, that's what'll make you gold for any company. Right? You have to embrace the change. It's inevitable. It's going to happen whether you like it or not. So just embrace it and get good at it. And the other thing I'll say, right, is that the job that you have tomorrow will not be the job that you have in 5 years. That job probably won't even exist in 5 to 10 years. And not by nature of the fact that you're not good at it, because you probably do phenomenal at it, but just the industry, all industries change consistently. And I've seen people in the past who could not embrace that change. They were just so locked in their ways. And I'll tell you, they really struggled in their career. And to this day, a lot of them will come to me and be like, I'm still stuck here. I don't know how to leave. I'm trying to get to that next level and I can't. And it's because they cannot be agile. So I can't stress that enough, that it's really, the onus is going to be on you to learn how to do that and learn how to adapt. And it's not easy. A lot of people aren't good at it. And you kind of just need to roll with it and figure it out and lean on your network to do so.
Do you think your career or your experience in athletics gave you some of those tools? And if so, how would you word that on the resume? And the reason I'm asking is I'm sitting on a search committee right now, and there's 30 candidates, and several of them are recent alumni, and it's killing me because so many of them played varsity sports, but they didn't tie it in to either the job description or, it's very successful teams, but they didn't say what I learned being a part of this successful team would make me a good member of your team because. And if you had any like keywords, and even if it's not athletics, if it's participation in a sorority or some type of campus event, it just really, it's killing me because these kids have this experience, but they they're making me do the work to think
Yeah.
where this is going to transfer. And frankly, there's 30 applicants. I'm not going to do the work. So I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that this group of students doesn't make that same mistake.
Yeah, no, that's great. So many things. Hand to God, when I said it earlier, I did mean it, that what happened to me on that field plays itself into my life personally and professionally every single day. It's everything, right? It's time management. It's being a collegiate athlete or a varsity athlete or being a part of a sorority. There's a time management aspect to it, and you need to be you need to be able to compartmentalize your day and to get to be the most effective that it can be. So I think that's part one of it. I think part two is the leadership role that comes with that, particularly if you're a captain. You need to, as a leader, you're only as good as the people that are next to you. And if you cannot figure out how to lead that team, then you will fail. It's just inevitable. And so if you can show that you've led the team on the soccer field or on the tennis court or wherever it is, you can do that in business as well. And then I think there's the other things that come with it, like the drive and the passion and the fortitude to keep going even when you lose. I think all of that plays into it as well, because I just think that that's life, right? You're not every decision you make is going to be a winner, right? Whether it's the role that you pick, the company that you pick, whether or not you hit your target metrics that you're trying to achieve every quarter, they're not always going to be wins. But you need to be able to get back up and play the game again, because you've got a new game that happens tomorrow. So if you dwell on the negatives and you dwell on the not so great successes, that's when you fail. But if you can take those, I don't even want to call them failures, but challenges, and take that into the next decision that you make, that's when it becomes a success. And that's when you learn from it.
Thanks. That really makes a lot of sense. And I think that's really great advice. Because things don't always go exactly as you planned. And sometimes you think things that are really, you're winging it, and then all of a sudden it really is very successful. So I think you've given a lot of good examples of how people have to just go with their instinct and go with their gut. How about,
particularly, I'll just say, for you all, you're not going to have a ton on your resume yet. So lean on those experiences and lean on whatever you did in college or the internships that you've had, because you have to, right? Once you get to a certain point in your career, people stop asking you what your major was. It has to do with what the performance that you did at the job prior. But until you get there, that's the stuff that they're going to lean on, is what you did in your collegiate life.
For sure. Has anyone had an internship or a job interview that they've been on and is brave enough to say how it went or how it didn't, what went right and what was wish you could have done a little better on? Nobody had an internship yet. Alex, have you had an internship yet?
Could you tell that I was thinking?
No. I just, I figured you're a senior. You probably had at least one.
Yeah. So I have a job now, and the job is totally remote. The interview was all over the phone. It wasn't my first interview, but it went smoother than I had expected. It was definitely out of my comfort zone, because this job is speaking to people all the time.
Can I ask where it is? Like what company?
I'm a contact tracer for the local department.
Cool.
I'm just always calling people.
Uh-huh.
And I hadn't done that before. I had a little business called I Fix iPhones, and I ran that from 2012 to 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And in that business, I did a little customer service when things didn't go right or a screen cracked the second time. But going back to the interview, it definitely pushed me out of my comfort zone, because I hadn't yet experienced much customer service. So, but it went well.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and thank you for sharing that. You guys are entering a really tough world right now, right? And I give you guys so much credit, because you're working from home, right? And you're forced to work from home, and so you don't get that camaraderie or that corporate setting that the rest of us had prior to the pandemic. And all of your interviews are probably on Zoom or, to your point, Alex, on the phone. That's not an easy thing. I mean, I'm on WebEx all day long and I still don't love it. It's not an easy thing. And so I give you guys a lot of credit because you're entering a really strange time. But again, right, agility. And then you're gonna speak to a bunch of students in 20 years and you're gonna point to this and people are gonna be like, I don't know how you did it. And you're just gonna say, I figured it out. I treaded water and we figured it out. So kudos to you.
Yeah, Alex, that's great experience though, to have the ability to, and that's something again that would be, really of interest to a future employer, having those are hard, those aren't, sales calls, or you're not calling a lead of someone saying, who said, I want information on this, you know what I mean? So those are skills that will transfer to anything.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you have to be very sympathetic and understanding on the phone, and build like a repertoire with the contact, because you'll be contacting that person every day for 10 days. And often over that time, it becomes more than what it started as. So you have to be ready for that. Yeah.
Great. How about anybody else? Do they have a job that they want to share, or an interview that they, on our last meeting, someone told about an interview that didn't go as well, and they asked, she said that when they said, do you have any questions, she kind of froze and said, oh, I don't. Oh, is that you, Unique? Or no? Okay, go ahead. You go ahead.
No, you continue. I'll go after you. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, she felt like an idiot because she had questions, but she just couldn't think of what she had. So, they were able to say, well, obviously you got to go and maybe write it down because you don't, you're not really sure how nervous you're going to be. So just always be armed with questions. And again, it's a different environment now, but when you start going back in person, you can kind of always look around someone's office and see like, oh, do they have a trophy? Do they have a picture of a boat or a kid? Or, you kind of can learn to make conversation, that kind of can break the ice until you think of the question, your big question. So go ahead, Unique. I'll let you take it.
I had a couple interviews with the company for a job that wasn't necessarily a leadership position, and I did have a lot of interviews before for other jobs, but most of them were for leadership positions. So I was so used to just speaking about things that I do well as a leader, or like my past leadership experience. But for these interviews, I remember for the second interview that I spoke to, she was very kind and she really just wanted to get to know me instead of what I knew about the company. And I did do a lot of research about the company. But I found what I did well with that interview was just speaking about myself, allowing her to get to know me a little more. I remember I spoke about my hair. I spoke about how I like to watch Grey's Anatomy, and stuff like that. And then when I had the final interview, it was just the third interviewer was just completely different. I joke around a lot. So with the second interviewer, like I made a couple jokes and like she laughed. And I noticed that when I was making jokes at the last interviewer, he was like, okay. And he wanted to know more about my resume and like my skills that I obtained throughout my college career, and he was more not trying to get to know me but trying to get to know what I can bring to their team or whatever. So with that interview, I remember at the end, I didn't feel like it went well. And at the end, he was like, do you have any questions for me? And I had wrote down a list of questions that related to the company to show him that I did my research and stuff. And I remember I asked him the first one and he was like, oh, like, that's not my department. I don't really know. You should continue reading the article. And I was like, wow, I'm not even going to read the other questions. So because I felt like it went so bad, I asked him if he can give me feedback on how I can do better on an interview in the future. Like, what could I have done better on this interview? And he was like, wow, like, I've never been asked that question. I said, wow, at least I asked a good question. I did get the job offer, but I was like I felt outside of my comfort zone within the last interview because I've never had an interview like that. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, that is interesting. Again, thank you for sharing. He also should have done a little bit of a better job making you feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just something that as a company, they should have taught him. But yeah, that's it's tough, right? Sometimes you click with your interviewer and sometimes you don't. And sometimes you just got to muddy through it, even when you're halfway through and you realize that you're like, oh, this isn't going well. And not to say that one didn't, but there will be times that you just know that it's not going so well. And you kind of just need to keep it flowing until you get to the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, but good for you to pivot like that. And then I don't know that was definitely throwing in the towel. I think that was kind of like a good humana question. It's like, oh, geez, you're not necessarily admitting that you didn't do a good job, but to always, I mean, in my business, I ask people for money or advice. And so, if you're not going to ask them for money, then ask for advice, so I think you pulled that one out. And that's also just a really good example of how the more interviews you can go on, the better, because you're going to have all different type of interactions. And even if you get called to an interview that you're not really that interested in the job, like my kids hate me because I would make them go interview for everything, because it's great experience and you can practice, so.
Yeah. And it's funny. Sometimes you think the interview went really well and you nailed it and you're like, I got this. And then all of a sudden you find out you didn't get it. And you're like, wait, what? And then the opposite happens. Sometimes you're like, wow, I bombed that completely. And then all of a sudden they're like, can you come in tomorrow for a second round? And you're like, sure, absolutely. I can come in for a second round. But so you don't know. And you also don't know. And, is there a candidate list of like the CMO's son who's coming in to interview, right? Because there's that you have to grapple with too. So to Jill's point, I always say the words, always take the meeting, and you can figure it out later if it's for you or if it's not for you, but always take the meeting. So does anyone have any specific questions about my journey or just corporate life in general or digital, or any questions? I'm an open book if you guys want to throw some out there. And if you don't feel comfortable, you can type it in the chat too.
Since you started working at IBM, has your role changed a lot?
Yes.
Since
yes.
you talked about it changing over the course of, I'm not sure how long, but 6 months you said was too short. But over 20 years should move around. So how much have you moved around with IBM?
So within IBM, I've changed roles. I've been there for 4 years. I've changed roles 2.5, but that was we'll say twice, but within the same group. And one of my mentors always told me that you should always, if you're going to make a change, you should never do 3 changes at once. So think of it as your discipline, right? So your role, right? If you're a digital strategist versus a campaign manager, that's a role. Your group, right? So do you work for the consulting services side? Do you work for global markets? Do you work for the blockchain group, or your manager? So you should never change all 3 at once. It's okay to change 2 of those or 1 of those, but never change all 3, because that's a lot of change at once. So that's like a piece of advice that I'd always take with me. For me personally, since I've been there for 4 years, I've changed roles twice, but I've been within the same global markets group. But also the group has changed a bit, right? You have to understand that for me, when I started, we had a different CMO, right? We just had a new CMO take over in February. So things are a bit different now. We also had a different CEO. Arvind took over as our CEO last February. So I think that's changed the game a little bit, just unique to this particular company right now. Which has also played a role in why I'm staying in a certain place within the group.
Thank you for answering my question.
Of course. Stephanie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. So you did work for a lot of large companies. So I was kind of wondering, I'm sure they had a lot of other applicants as well. So what do you think made you stand out compared to everyone else?
It's a good question. I think in the beginning of my career was probably the fact that I think sports played a big role, right? I think there's for me personally, I will always hire an athlete. I think that what you learn on the field and those lessons that you take with you, that really does show itself in your day to day. I think later on in my career, I think it helped that I had worked on really big projects. And so that's another thing I would say is take the stretch projects when you can, because you can point to those in your resume and in your interviews and really point to those as key wins for you as an employer or employee. Those stretch projects are what's going to help you grow in the business, even if it's not your day-to-day, right? If maybe it's a short-term project that's only going to take you 3 months or 4 months, do those, because I think those are what's going to set you apart in some of those bigger companies. Because it's true, right? There's a million applicants for every role. And especially now, it's a weird time for people graduating. And so my heart goes out to you guys, because it's a lot right now, but I think that's the kind of stuff that'll set you apart.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. Does anyone else want to chime in? The other thing I'll throw in as other kind of learnings that I've gotten along the way, I'd say use your network, but use it strategically and in a meaningful manner. And that means I wouldn't go out to LinkedIn and connect with every person whose name starts with C, right? Because I can't tell you how many connections I get that are very much copy and paste. And that's very obvious to me. And I don't love when people do that. Find the connection with me that's going to make me want to connect with you. Alumni, I will always say yes to. People who have questions about IBM, I will always connect to. But find something, right? It's very obvious when it's just a copy and paste, and clearly they've sent this out to a million other people who happen to do a similar role. So if you can find that nuance of what a true connection is and make it more meaningful, I think people are more likely to connect and more likely to respond.
Question, I just was thinking of having to, go back into the role of being an interviewee, and, people would say what book did you read or whatever. And I'm like, oh dear God. But what podcasts or business, are there anything that you can recommend that students could have timely topics to talk about?
Yeah.
I listen to Sway and some of these other podcasts, but I think if there's any that you could recommend to the students while they're commuting, or, I know they've got a lot of technology on the plate already, but is there anything that you could recommend where they could be up to date on a broad range of business that could kind of give them, that they could drop the name of or drop a topic that they heard about, just so they could be conversational?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I cannot stress this enough. I listen to about 20 podcasts a week. Half of them are Bravo related and in pop culture. The other half are very business oriented. The CMO podcast, I listen to every episode. It's phenomenal. It's always a CMO that happens to be really prevalent right now. So they did one on the CMO of Peloton. They did one on Pinterest, David's Bridal. Those are just really great examples of marketers who have done really well. And there's always some sort of, right? Every brand is known for something. So he does such a good job of getting out the why of that company. And so I hands down recommend that one. It's 60 minutes. It flies by. It's just really, really well done. And then I think there's the industry specific ones. So I work for the consumer industry. I work for global markets, but my role is we're industry focused. And so right now I work for the consumer industry. So there's a handful that I listen to around that. Retail Gets Real is one, but there's very specific to what's happening in the industry. So I would look for the industry specific ones. And then just from a women in business and in leadership perspective, Harvard Business School does one women. I have to look at the exact wording. I think it's Women Who Work or Women. I'll find out the exact one and get back to you. But I'm picturing the logo in my head.
Yeah, I can find it.
Yeah, so that's a good one. I think podcasts are awesome, though. I think they're such a great way. You could just listen to them on the road or while you're driving or commuting. And there's so many good ones out there. So many. So many bad ones also, but.
Well, that's why I asked, because like sometimes you get like halfway through and I'm like, I just wasted a half an hour of my life, but
Yes.
then you don't have to listen to it again.
And it's funny, I saw a meme once. Actually, it's the dude who has signs, the guy who holds the signs.
Oh yeah.
Please tell me somebody else. Jill, does anyone else besides Jill and I know that one? The dude who holds the signs, no? On Instagram? Okay. Anyway, there was one that said, not everyone needs a podcast. And it's so true, because I think they're a dime a dozen now, but the really good ones, they stick. So.
That Harvard business is called Women at Work. It's
at work,
like
yes.
A blue logo with kind of like a.
Yes, that's it.
I guess it's a W and I guess it's 2 W's, one upside down and one right side up.
Yes, that's it.
All right. Subscribe. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. I'll think of a few others that I've been toying with lately too, and send your way.
Oops. Sorry. I'm listening to it right now. Stop.
And then the other thing I'll add, just while we're chatting, is grammar matters. I mean, I don't think I need to tell you that. Take it from me, somebody whose name is not as common as some other names. I get Connie all the time. I can't even tell you how many times I get Connie. I get the 1 R, the no E, the missing an N. It's really important. Spell people's names right. I used to run the internship program for my group at IBM, and I have thrown away resumes when the grammar is just really poorly written, or whether it's on a resume or a follow-up note, I've completely just thrown it in the garbage. And I have no qualms about doing that. And I've had people that have nailed the interviews and then the follow-up just is terrible. So take the time to read it, send it to a friend to look at if you need to, just really take the time to look through it.
That's great advice, especially, in the committee that I'm on. It's like, typos in the resume.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so hard because, I want to give people a chance, but, accidents happen, mistakes are made, but if your job is communication, like you can't, you got to be a little better than that.
Yeah. And in today's day and age, right? Like it's you'd be surprised how many people, even people that are not junior, that are senior level, that don't write well-written emails. And I can't stress it enough that it's so obvious when there's slang in there, and you don't need to be super formal. Like the days of saying like sincerely Corinne, like that's never going to happen. That's very dated, but saying things correctly and keeping the jargon out of it is important.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Stephanie, I want to thank you. Charlene had to go off to a different meeting. The dean called, and so a lot of the faculty that normally would have been on this call were called into some, I don't think it was emergency, but called into some meeting. But Stephanie, thanks for acting as a student leader for this group. And thank you, students. I know that you're in the home stretch of this, this semester. So I'm glad you took time to have to meet Corinne. And Corinne, thank you so much. It really helps so much to hear your story and to have your insight as someone who has really navigated such an interesting career. And it sounds like you're going to continue to always keep doing interesting things. So I appreciate you taking the time from your day and offering us that insight to our students.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I think this is a great program, and everyone feel free to, LinkedIn if you have any questions or follow-up questions and you want to chat. I'm happy to set up one-on-ones and happy to help in any way I can. Enjoy the last couple of weeks of the semester. Graduation is happening what day in a week?
Well, it's tricky because it's going to be virtual because there's going to be, the governor kind of muddied the waters as far as saying that we could have commencement, but it was so limited with the number of people that we could have. We would have had to have like 25 different ceremonies. So, but the college is doing a really good job. They're trying to make the best of it. It'll be very festive, and people can come like walk across the stage, but it's not going to be traditional. So you guys are just going to have to make up for it by attending reunions, and like we'll just have the best parties ever at your alumni weekends.
Yeah. And when life gets back to normal, if anyone ever wants to get coffee or, have a chat in real life, I'm open to that as well. So definitely reach out, and good luck with the last couple of weeks of school.
That's terrific. That's very generous of you. All right. And I mean it, students, if there's students, that just sounded like I was like a second grade teacher. If anybody needs any help being introduced to anybody, or if you just want ideas or anything, give me a call and I can link you to whoever's in alumni engagement who might be able to help, or if there's someone I have a relationship with that might be in your field, I'm certainly happy to make a introduction for you. So terrific. All right. Well, everybody have a great afternoon, and thanks so much for attending. And Corinne, great to meet you. And you got to say hey to Tracy.
I will.
All
Thanks,
right.
guys. Take care.
Thank you very much. Take care. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much
Thank
for your
you.
time.
Take care.
Thank you.